Episode 105, April to May 1915. I journeyed into German West amidst hideous danger of mines and thirst. By Lt-Col Deneys Reitz, Minister of Agriculture, Government of South Africa. Supplementing Colonel True's story in episode 104 of Botha's advance to the German capital, Windhoek, Lt. Colonel Deneys Reitz describes a trek made at the time under circumstances of the gravest danger and hardship. Few more moving episodes have been related in this work than the loss of Colonel Reitz's horse, or risks more grave recounted than those incurred during this ride through a waterless desert. Lt. Colonel Reitz's career as a soldier started when he fought in the Boer War as a boy of 17. During the Great War, he served in the German West and German East African campaigns, and afterwards went to France, where he was severely wounded in 1918. He later took an active part in public life as a cabinet minister in the South African government. German West is a very large territory. It stretches from the Orange River to the Kunene, 900 miles north, and from west to east it lies between the Atlantic Ocean and the Kalahari Desert, a width of 400 miles. Much of this vast space is arid, so the moving of troops was by no means an easy matter, and if the Germans took to guerrilla warfare, as we had done against the British long ago, they might easily involve us in a long and inconclusive campaign. Both Smuts and Botha were alive to this danger, and they were determined to prevent it. As a preliminary, General Smuts had sent Sir Duncan McKenzie and 800 horsemen towards Gibian to cut off the retreat of the German forces operating in the south, and he was making ready to march the rest of his army into the hinterland. To that end, we busied ourselves with preparations. In our immediate vicinity, the enemy had withdrawn shortly before, but they had left many unpleasant tokens of their occupation, for we discovered that they had mined the roads and the railway track, and had planted mines at random in the open veld, and in dwelling houses, stables, and kraals, and they had poisoned the wells. As far as the wells were concerned, we could not complain, for warning notices had been left, but to bury infernal machines in a place they had given up was new to us. I made early acquaintance with one of these mines, and it cost me the life of my horse, Bismarck. I was coming from the railhead one morning, and overtook an infantry company plodding along. I rode chatting to the officer at their head, when suddenly there was a roar in the midst of the soldiers, and a column of smoke and dust shot a mile high, whilst fragments of metal went whizzing in all directions. When the air cleared, 2 men lay dead, and a dozen wounded, and many others were temporarily blinded by the spurting sand. My horse, stung by flying grit and pebbles, reared and plunged, and when I dismounted to help the injured, he gave a snort of terror, and wrenching free, headed for the waterless desert that lay westward for 100 miles and more. By the time we had made the wounded men comfortable, and I had procured another horse, Bismarck was a mere speck on the distant horizon, and he was steadily making deeper into the sandy waste. I followed him for hours, for I hoped to save him from the certain death from thirst that awaited him, but in the end, the animal I was riding gave in, and I was obliged to retrace my steps on foot, leading him behind me, and when last I saw my poor misguided horse, he was still going to his doom. When I reached camp, and Reuter, my servant, heard of Bismarck's fate, tears ran down his ugly, wizened countenance, for he loved the horse even more than I did. 2 days later, I witnessed another explosion. I was standing in the street at Aus, when again there came the report of a mine. The roof of a neighboring stable was lifted bodily into the air, followed by the carcass of a mule, and an officer fell wounded to the ground. The mine had been set beneath the stable floor, and the mule had touched it off. Similar occurrences were comparatively frequent. One of our men turned the handle of a door in a dwelling house, and was blown to pieces. Another, who lit the wick of a lamp suspended from the ceiling of a room, met with instant death, and in the north, General Botha's troops had many losses of the same kind. One evening, riding down a gorge near Carnus, we came on a grisly sight. Swaying from a branch of a tree were the mummified bodies of 3 Khoikhoi natives. They had been hanged here by the Germans some time before, to judge by their condition, but for what offence I never heard. By this time, General Smuts was anxious for news of Sir Duncan Mackenzie's column that had disappeared into the void, and he ordered James Leask and me to ride after them. Leask in civil life was a highly placed government official, and we were old acquaintances. I had 2 horses left, one for myself and one for Reuter, and Leask was also well mounted. We set out at once, our road running through wild country, sparsely inhabited by nomad Khoikhoi tribes. Occasionally we found a dead horse or mule to show that Mackenzie had gone by, but we travelled nearly 100 miles before we came on a few of his men, left behind at Bethany Mission to look after the weaker animals. They had no news, and we pushed on. Game was not plentiful, but there was an occasional antelope to be shot, and we had no difficulty in finding water. We went by Wasserfall and Besondermaid to the Great Fish River, and thence up past Bukaros Peak, through the Beseba Reserve. On our 4th day, at Deutsches Ertle, we struck an outpost. They said they had heard the sound of distant gunfire during the night, so we hurried forward, and towards noon came up with Mackenzie and his men in possession of Gibian town. He had got astride the northern railway line just too late to cut off the German retreat, but he had fought a sharp rearguard action in which he had captured some guns and 150 prisoners, as well as several trains and large quantities of war material. He lost 26 men killed and 50 or 60 wounded, and the German casualties were about the same. After some days, Leask and I, and a Colonel Muller, were assigned 2 motor cars that had accompanied the expedition, and were instructed to go north towards Windhoek, to establish contact with General Botha's troops, who, if they had not already taken the capital, must be nearing it by now. We reached Marienthal by the end of the 1st day, and here we found a picket of Mackenzie's men that had pushed forward. They warned us to go carefully. Somewhere ahead, they said, the German force that had escaped was slowly falling back, blowing up the railway as it went. We started at dawn. From Marienthal, the railway runs through the Rehoboth Reserve, a huge area inhabited by a mixed-race people. It is a sterile, barren tract, across which probably no motor cars had ever ventured, and we had a trying time. We ploughed all day through heavy sand and blazing heat, until, by evening, we had used up every drop of water in quenching our thirst and in providing for the radiators. We moved parallel to the railway line, and at every station the boreholes, wells, and tanks were dynamited. Therefore, when at last we were brought to a halt for lack of water, we were in a serious predicament. There was no open water that we knew of within 80 miles of us. The cars were dry, and so were we, and we spent an anxious, thirsty night. At daybreak, after trying in vain to extract some water from a destroyed borehole, we were lucky enough to find a patch of tsama melon growing in the veld. In these parts, the game and the natives rely almost entirely on this species of cucumber during the dry season. Liquid is extracted by gently heating the melons, and we were able to distill enough water for ourselves and the radiators. We moved on, but saw no more tsama that day, and by noon, owing to the intense heat and the heavy going, the cars gave out for the 2nd time. We calculated that we were within walking distance of Rehoboth Station, which by our map lay somewhere ahead, so we abandoned the cars and went on foot. The sun beat down, our drinking water was finished, and this knowledge made us the more thirsty. In our heart of hearts, we felt that our chances of finding any water at the station were remote, seeing how thoroughly the Germans had destroyed the wells and boreholes which we had discovered up to now, and we tramped along the railway track in gloomy silence. At one spot we passed 2 lonely graves. On each headstone was the name of a German soldier with an inscription, Hier erdurstet, to show that they had perished of thirst on some bygone patrol, and this did not raise our spirits. After 3 hours, our tongues swollen with thirst, we came to a place where the railway line had spanned one of those waterless riverbeds that intersect the country at frequent intervals. The bridge had been dynamited, and on the sandy course below were 2 engines piled one upon the other, a mass of twisted wreckage. The Germans had mined the bridge, and then run the engines over. As we stood gazing at them, I caught a shimmer through the torn side of one of the boilers. We scrambled hurriedly down, and found a supply of water, providentially unspilt, in a corner of an engine tank. There was enough and to spare, and in a moment we were ladling out long, satisfying draughts. When we had finished drinking, we were new men, and still further in luck, for climbing a rise, I saw the buildings of Rehoboth Station a mile or 2 beyond. Cheerfully, we filled our bottles and an old bucket picked up nearby, and walked back with sufficient water for the cars. By 10 o'clock that night, we had reached the station with both machines. We slept till morning, and then inspected our surroundings. Here again, the water supply had been completely demolished, but again we were fortunate. The tanks and boreholes were destroyed, and the rolling stock standing on the line had been set on fire, but a little square-bellied engine, in a shed by itself, had been overlooked, and its boiler was filled to the brim with clear, cool water. This freed us from further care, for we knew that we would be running out of the desert beyond this point. From the trampled spoor around the station buildings, and from the general appearance of things, we concluded that the Germans had now abandoned the railway line, and were continuing their withdrawal by road. And on looking northeast, along the way they had gone, we could see a tall pillar of dust, where their column was trekking 15 or 20 miles away. They must have left in a hurry, for considerable quantities of stores and military kit were strewn about, and although the wells and water towers were destroyed, the burning of the rolling material was incomplete. As the railway line runs straight from here to Windhoek, 60 miles off, we argued, correctly as it proved, that General Botha must have occupied the capital, and that these troops, having got wind of his arrival, had swung east to avoid capture. After we had satisfied ourselves of this, we continued our journey through improved country, which enabled us to make better progress, though the going was still heavy. Far away to our right moved the dust cloud of the retreating Germans. We could make out a convoy of wagons escorted by infantry, and about 200 horsemen, and this was the nearest sight I got of the enemy in southwest. Towards evening, we ran into the mountains around Windhoek, and before long we met a picket of General Botha's men. They said the town had surrendered, but the bulk of the German forces had retreated north into the wilds. We entered after dark to find the streets swarming with South Africans, some riding about, others on the sidewalks around their campfires. We slept in a vacant yard for the night, and reported next morning to General Botha, whom we found in the citadel, where he had taken up his headquarters. I had not met him since the end of the rebellion on the day of the surrender at Reitz, and he looked a different man. To him, the rebellion had been a deep tragedy of his race, but fighting for a territory which he regarded as part of his own country was another matter, and he was far more cheerful, as he sat in Governor Seitz's office telling us of the hardships encountered on his way up from the sea.
There's a silver lining in the sky, but swallowed pathetic words. Goodbye, goodbye, when the tear may begin from your eye. Oh, it's hard to part, I know. I'll be tickled to death, I go.